As a listener to Impromptu, I have no doubt that you value different perspectives and that you value great journalism and understand why it's more important than ever. If you haven't taken the step yet to become a subscriber of the Washington Post, in my humble opinion, this might make a difference. Right now, you can subscribe for just 99 cents every 4 weeks for your first year. You can grab this offer through the link in our show notes. Don't wait, though, because we're only doing this through June 3rd. So hit pause and check out the show notes now. You cannot beat 99 cents every 4 weeks for all the Washington Post gives you. All right, here's the show. I have a would you rather question. High-rise condo or house in the woods?
I'm obsessed with this because it used to be high-rise condo and now it's a house in the woods.
Because?
Because I turned 30 last summer, and I have realized after living in many high-rise, lovely apartment buildings that I actually like solitude and nature and touching grass and hugging trees and quiet and leaving my apartment without seeing anyone.
Oh, man, I am so split because I am a theater girl at heart, but I also love the woods. So am I allowed to cop out and say both?
You may. I have no trouble answering this question because I actually have a house in the woods. And I would definitely rather have a high-rise condo. When you live in the woods, you don't know this before you actually move in. The critters are a huge problem.
Yeah.
My entire garage is full of spider webs. We have raccoons. The deer eat our plants.
Yeah, but you probably get some cute wildlife too, like bunnies and deer and all of the other Disney creatures, no?
My cat ate those. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions. It's a weekly show where we take you into the conversations behind the columns. I'm Charles Lane, Deputy Opinion Editor, and this week we're talking about home ownership and whether it might be losing its luster. Owning a home has, for many years, been a part of the so-called American dream, the way to move up in the world, grow your wealth, and then pass it on to future generations. But should that change? How are people thinking about homeownership differently now than they did perhaps a generation ago? To discuss this, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Alexi McCammond, an opinion editor working with you and all the other great people.
I'm Catherine Rampell. I'm a columnist.
So home prices have been pretty steep in recent years, and today's high interest rates and low inventory are making it worse. Fewer people find homes that are affordable for them, and the age of first-time home buyers continues to creep up. Catherine, what's happening? Why is home ownership all of a sudden out of reach for so many folks?
It's because we haven't built enough in this country. At heart, that is the main problem, that after the housing bust, circa 2007, we just stopped building, essentially. Partly that was forced by kind of a reckoning within the housing industry, which had built, a ton of McMansions and other things, and housing values had been quite inflated, and then there was an overcorrection. Partly that's about NIMBYism, that whenever there are places that hope to build housing, particularly higher density housing, there's a lot of local opposition. And then you get that coming into collision with the fact that we have these demographic changes, millennials, which are sort of an echo baby boom generation, coming into their prime childbearing years, their prime home buying years. They're all looking for houses. You have constrained supply meeting very strong demand, and that's going to lead home prices to go higher. We have also, of course, had an increase in interest rates from the Federal Reserve, which is not making the cost of a mortgage any cheaper. Normally, you would expect that higher interest rates would be offset by declining housing prices, because like any given amount of money per month in a mortgage payment, more of it's kind of getting eaten up by the interest rate. So that would have to push down the actual price of the house. That hasn't really happened. And again, I think that comes back to supply.
So Catherine is partly blaming supply and partly blaming millennials. I guess millennials get blamed for everything.
Yeah.
Alexi,
absolutely.
And I'm not going to really dispute that. Alexi, how about you? You are a millennial.
Yeah.
Do you dream of home ownership? How do you think about buying versus renting?
It's interesting because I grew up in Illinois, and so I feel like my default was like, 3 kids, a husband, a dog, a white picket fence, a house. And since living in New York and DC and Chicago and big cities, I just don't really see that as my goal anymore. And I increasingly hear from friends the same thing. I think it's in part because of just like the lifestyle we have in cities. We spend a lot more money. The activities we like to do are a lot more expensive. Also, I don't really want to pay for home repairs. And I love being able to just call my maintenance guy in the apartment and know he'll be there within 10, 20 minutes to fix the dishwasher or the ice machine. It's just not, like I said, I'm 30, and it's not something that I feel like I'm really even stressed about at this point.
That's smart, that point about the sort of hassle factor and cost of home maintenance. And following up on that, Catherine, what about home ownership as a source of individual family wealth? I mean, that's always been one of the big selling points of the individual home. Is that changing?
For people who own their homes, particularly if they've paid off their mortgage, this is the single biggest asset that most of them have. So yes, this is a major source of wealth, and particularly if housing prices are going up. That nest egg is getting bigger, at least on paper. This actually relates to what we were just talking about, why supply has been so constrained. If you have a system that both culturally, it's part of the American dream to own your home, and financially, this is the biggest source of wealth, pushes people towards home ownership or emphasizes home ownership as their main nest egg, that means any additional building in their area that might bring down housing prices threatens those savings, threatens the value of that asset. And I think that's part of the reason why there's so much NIMBYism in this country, why there's hesitation about building more housing. A lot of it is like character of the neighborhood type phrasing, which in some cases can be read as racist. And in some cases, maybe it's just an aesthetic thing. I don't know. But at heart, I think it comes down to people's financial self-interest. Housing prices are high for new home buyers. That's bad for new home buyers. But if housing prices are high and you already own your home, that's great for you. You want them to keep going up. You don't want anything to dilute the value of that asset. So this causes a lot of weird distortions in the country. And the fact that our tax code, by the way, incentivizes home buying as an activity that people should engage in addition to those sort of cultural and other financial sources of attractiveness of a home, all of that comes together to sort of collude against the new home buyer because there's just not that much incentive to increase supply.
The single-family home is what I think they call an illiquid, one-way bet on a narrow asset class. And if that bet is paying off for you, you have every incentive to hold on to it. It's very hard to trade out of it. And that is exactly what you're describing. I just used the jargon. Alexi, we're not, I should emphasize, we're not giving like real financial advice here. That's in no way what we're doing. These are just our opinions. But can you respond to what Catherine just said? Are there better things to do with your money than a down payment on a house?
I think she has a point about an individual's financial interest. I don't want to sound like I'm flippant and don't care about my money or my future. I have also just come up in a different time, and culturally, things are totally different post-pandemic. Not to be macabre, but I feel like we've written about this, the YOLO economy. I feel like people truly are like, we really only live once. I'd like to spend my money how I'd like to spend it. But I think the real cultural difference with my generation, too, is I love DC. I've been here for 6 years. I don't want to be here forever. A lot of my friends don't want to be in the same place forever. They have kind of pipe dreams almost of just moving to LA or going to London or spending a year somewhere else because we can. And I think we all saw that during the pandemic, and especially with hybrid work. People are like, why would I lock myself into this place, especially if you're not married, if you're not in a long-term relationship, if you don't have kids. Very few of my friends have kids. Very few of them are even married. So I feel like our incentives are just different. And when you have a partner or family to provide for, your money would go there. Instead, we're all kind of just inherently more selfish, and we spend it on ourselves or our dogs.
I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned the dog because it had seemed to have dropped off the list, but at least that part of your American dream is still there. I want to get more into what home buying means to people's identities as Americans, but we'll do that after this break. Welcome back. I'm Charles Lane, and this is Impromptu. We've talked about how market conditions affect home ownership, but it's also something that the government gets involved in and tries to support and subsidize. Catherine mentioned the tax code, but there are actually a bunch of other programs that subsidize credit and so forth. Catherine, should everybody own a home? Is that a socially beneficial policy objective?
I think of home ownership as consumption and not investment. You asked me before about whether people think about their homes as their primary investment. And for most people who own a home, it is. But that's not necessarily something we should be nudging people toward. As you pointed out, that is a very undiversified investment. And if you bet wrong, if you happen to be in a part of the country where housing prices go down, that can turn out very badly for you, particularly if it is your main source of retirement income, effectively, or your main source of savings that you hope will support you when you retire if you want to sell that asset. And as we learned in 2007, home prices do not always go up. So from an investment perspective, I do not think we should be encouraging people to buy homes. It's just not a safe way either to invest their money relative to something like the stock market, for example, which has over time generally gone up. And from these weird incentives it creates to block additional housing supply. When you nudge people towards home buying or home ownership as their primary source of savings, that creates all sorts of weird distortions where they don't want other people to basically have affordable homes. If people want to buy a home, then, that's their preference. As Lexi pointed out, home ownership does come with a lot of downsides, including you have to repair your own appliances, for example. You have to unclog your own toilets, which you may not have to do if you live in
I still do.
You still
I
do?
still have to
Well,
do that. Yeah, they don't do that.
But if people have preferences, again, I think they should think about housing primarily as a consumption choice rather than an investment.
As we've been discussing, federal policy has put its thumb very, very heavily on the scale in favor of lifting the overall home ownership rate. And it's very little effect to show for that. So back in 1984, the national home ownership rate was 64.5%. And today it's 65.9%. And in between, there was this huge spike and home ownership crashed because of the 2008 recession. You get the impression that that's kind of like the max rate we're ever going to get, 60 to 65%. I mean, there's certain people in this society, I'm thinking of, disabled elderly people who have to live in institutions or, people who just enjoy living in apartments and have mobile grid that are never, for whom home ownership is never going to be a good deal. Having heard all of this, Alexia, are you now revisiting in any way your original dream, the husband, the dog? Let's leave the husband out of it. But the house, the home ownership, do you feel more comfortable now that that's not a thing?
Oh, certainly. I also am obsessed with thinking about how, we don't own anything anymore when we rent everything. Things we used to buy DVDs. We all have Netflix. We rent Ubers. You don't have to own a car. You rent a house or an apartment. You don't have to own a house. People are renting their clothes, through different services. You don't have to own clothes. We obviously stream music. You don't own, we're moving in this direction as a society where ownership just simply isn't the goal or the end for a lot of companies and a lot of products and services. And so in that sense, I don't feel bad. I also, as we're talking, have failed to mention that my younger sister, she's 2 years younger, and she recently moved from renting an apartment, a high-rise in Seattle, back home to Illinois, and she's looking to buy a house with her husband. And I was like, that's so stupid. Why wouldn't you just stay in Seattle? It's so much better than, we're from like a rural area in Illinois. And I was like, you have all your friends there. Your lifestyle's better. It's so much more fun. She's just like, it's so expensive and we're wasting money and we'd rather invest in bricks. And I'm like, what?
Well, no, what do you think of that? I mean, we'll leave out the fact that Alexi's kind of just like dissed her sister on the podcast.
Oh, I
but
love her
After just saying she wanted a house in the woods, no less.
Yes. And so, Catherine, what is your reaction? What is your reaction to that anecdote? And before you answer, let me just load the question a little bit by saying, in one weird way, home ownership is preferable because people can sort of live in a small town, but still work, for remotely for a lot of companies that are headquartered in big areas or headquartered kind of nowhere at all.
Just to be clear, I think we're talking about a relatively small segment of the population.
Right.
The vast majority of Americans are in jobs that require them to show up on a work site in person. So that's, people who cut hair, who clean, who work in retail, who work in food services. So yes, there's a higher socioeconomic tier. People with college degrees tend to be higher income who can have this nice best of both worlds situation. But for most people, they need to have a place that allows them a humane commute. And so there's kind of a two-track system here. Sure, lots of white-collar tech bro types maybe are now moving to their ranches in Idaho or in Montana, but the vast majority of Americans do not have those kinds of options.
And that's where the NIMBYism kicks in, because the people you're describing who say work in a service industry or maybe even a factory, manufacturing, that kind of thing, they can't find the affordable home near where their place of work is. And then there's a terrible transportation issue.
Even some white collar jobs like teachers, right? Teachers, for the most part, have to be there in person and have been priced out of a lot of the housing markets where they work. Think about what's it like to be a teacher if you teach in San Francisco. It's just a really hard situation. And it's not just about the coasts now. It's really a large swath of the country that is dealing with the burden of these high housing costs. And you hear senators from red states talking about it for the same reason.
Well, what's your takeaway, Alexi?
That we should all have more dogs and fewer husbands.
Well, I don't have a husband. I have a wife.
Well, she's good to keep.
Yeah, and I have no dog. Formerly, we had a cat. Catherine?
Yeah, I'm in favor of more pet ownership in general, whether it's dogs or cats or any of the small woodland creatures that we were talking about earlier. But I think in general, on a more serious note, I would say that we do have a lot of distortions in this country towards homeownership without actually solving any of the problems caused by those distortions. And it's really discouraging to me that we haven't figured out how to build more supply so that people who have strong preferences to live in the woods or the suburbs or even buy a house can do so because there are places for them to buy.
So I'll be serious with my takeaway, which is the reason I find this subject both fascinating and in a real sense kind of troubling is the connection between home ownership and wealth and wealth inequality. Mm-hmm. The fact that home ownership, for all intents and purposes in the 20th century, was restricted overwhelmingly to white people almost by law and sometimes by custom. The fact that as the country is becoming more diverse, that's happening at the same time that these opportunities for home ownership are kind of being closed off, I think is a really urgent issue. And part of the reason I agree with you so strongly, Catherine, about the issue of supply is that it strikes me as really wrong that people who sort of already have their piece of the rock, whether it's a suburb like Brentwood, California, or almost anywhere else, reject increased density that would enable other people to get a piece of it. And I think that's a really major policy issue. And on that serious note, we have to wrap up. We're going to try one new thing at the end of our episode. What do you guys think we should do on our next impromptu? Any topics you're dying to hear about or talk about, Alexi?
Oh, yes. There was this great story in Wired magazine Apparently, OnlyFans influencers are hiring third-party people, random dudes, women, whoever, to act like they're messaging, DMing with the guys who are sending them money and pictures and stuff. And so imagine you're DMing this model you think is DMing you back. It turns out it's some dude in Ohio making $2 an hour. It is wild, and also a potential legal nightmare because of fraud issues.
It wasn't me. Catherine?
Well, don't worry, Alexi. AI is probably going to take all those jobs anyway.
Yes.
For me, I always like talking about taxes. I snuck them into this podcast episode, but I would be glad to talk about the Biden versus Trump tax proposals, especially since a new report came out today suggesting that if you look at Trump's overall fiscal agenda, including his tariffs, he's going to raise taxes on most Americans, which I think most people don't realize.
Well, I feel if we taxed OnlyFans, we could probably wipe out the federal deficit in about 2 years.
Let's do it.
Thank you, guys. Well, thank you guys so much
Thank you
for joining me on another episode of Impromptu.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Chuck.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Damir Marusic, Chris Sullentrop, and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Chris Rucan designed our art. Special thanks to Millie Mitra, Nick Safin, Renita Jablonski, and David Shipley. Find Impromptu wherever you get your podcasts, and if you like the show, please follow us so you don't miss an episode. A reminder that right now, through June 3rd, you can become a Washington Post subscriber at an incredible offer, 99 cents every 4 weeks for your entire first year. And since you're already a listener, I want to make sure you know about another benefit of being a subscriber. You can listen to almost everything we publish on our website and the Washington Post app. The best news and information is right at your fingertips in the way that works best for you. Do not miss out on this incredible offer. Again, you can become a subscriber right now through the link in our show notes.